Hello, hello. Somehow now that I'm seeing myself, I just look very, very pink overall. I went with the pink lip gloss to match the pink hair. Just a lot of like pinkness going on here. So welcome to the pink experience, the Kendra Kuna experience of pinkness. No, I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna be able to come up with anything around that on the fly, but I do want to say welcome, welcome. I am super excited about my hair, actually. So as you're joining in, I'd love to just know who is here and where you're joining from. I am in my office and I'm on the west coast of California in the United States. So it's about 1:01 p.m. where I am, but I know when I go live that sometimes people are joining from parts of Europe, occasionally even Australia, Hong Kong, other parts of the United States. And I just really love getting to feel the when and the where and the place and the time and how we're connected in that way. So if you're willing to just bring into the space where are you joining from, I'd love to get a chance to see that. So I did a piece quite a while ago, actually, that was the 4 pillars of sacred sovereignty. And it came ultimately in the comments. Once I'm done, I'll post those 4 pillars as well as the article that I wrote about it after doing a live video teaching. But I've been using the term sacred sovereignty for, I don't know, almost like 5 years. And the in-person live women's retreats that I would lead, I called them sacred sovereignty. And it really had to do, anyway, it has to do with like a lot of different pieces, but that was where ultimately then this distillation of these 4 pillars came from, was looking at the work that I do in that realm and why was I calling those events sacred sovereignty? Like what was sort of the intention, what was happening there? And then to some extent, like also my desire to put the 4 pillars that I saw, the 4, not the 5. Now I'm doing 5, but the 4 pillars that I saw into the world came a lot from, I've seen this happen a lot, and probably many of you also have had this happen, that like some piece of content, some teaching, some information, some idea, something comes through, and then suddenly it's everywhere, and it's like, wait a minute, like I just thought about that. And it's not just like Facebook ads or Google listening, right? You have a thought, and then suddenly like all around you, people are talking about it. And I think that happens for a variety of reasons. One is that sometimes when something comes into our own consciousness, we see and we hear it more in other people's writings and teachings and sharings and what they're talking about. We're like, oh my God, I wasn't thinking about it, so I didn't hear it. And then the other is that I really think there are these like cultural waves, and we just catch them. And we think, I've definitely had this happen, like, oh my God, like I'm so brilliant and I have such, unique thoughts, and there's another word for it I can't think of right now. And a lot of times it's actually something that's just like coming through the cultural consciousness. And I happened to catch that thread, and so did, like 50 other people. And so anyway, the piece around sovereignty was really coming through so strongly. And I love that sovereignty is having like a cultural wave surging emergence. And I wanted to flesh out where I come from on that. So before I dive into the 5th pillar of sacred sovereignty, I want to read to you the 4 so that we don't rehash that ad nauseum, if you will. Let me find it here. So originally I said the 4 pillars of sacred sovereignty. Number 1, the recognition that my life is not dictated by external circumstances. Number 2, The recognition that my life is not dictated by internal circumstances. Number 3, the capacity to limit, in parentheses, my choice or choices in service of more freedom. And number 4, the recognition of interdependence, which includes both agency and communion. So again, I'll post both that graphic in the comments when I'm done, and I'll also post a link to the article where I really go into each of those 4 pillars in more depth. And I believe attached to that is also the original video I made. So if you're just hearing those for the first time and you're like, holy shit, Kendra, that's amazing, I want to hear more, I will provide the resources for that in the comments. And what I realized later, I was like, oh, I think there's a 5th pillar of sacred sovereignty. And in its simplicity, what I would say the 5th pillar of sacred sovereignty is honesty. Now, for the purposes of today, I'm really going to talk about honesty with self, because that's where I believe that honesty begins. And in all of my teachings, you know, I said this over and over and over, like countless times in my Beyond Boundaries program. I say it in the Fierce Grace Incubator. I say this in all the practices that we do in the collective. Everything that I teach, every time I get people together, there's some place where there's some piece of self-reflection. And I will always, always, always say, just be honest with yourself. Whether you ever choose to share this with another person or other people or in any way, shape, or form, whether you ever choose to act on it, whether you reveal, like whatever it is that comes out of this, that is 100% a choice. It's based on many, 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 many circumstances. And being honest with ourselves, ultimately it's a choice. What I'm kind of pointing to with the 5th pillar of sacred sovereignty is that for a lot of us, actually, it hasn't been a choice. Many of us haven't developed the capacity to really be honest with ourselves. But in developing that capacity, of course, in some way, shape, or form, I'm like, yes, you get to choose whether you tell yourself the truth also. But it really is like my deepest wish that at the very least, we and you tell the truth to yourself. Like, you just get honest with yourself. You get honest with yourself about what you feel. You get honest with yourself about where you're at. You get honest with yourself about what you want. You get honest with yourself about what you think. Like, just whatever those things are. And part of what I mean by honesty is rather than like discover what's true about me and be honest about it, it's kind of discover, but it's more like actually it's just describing what's already so. And that's why I think it's so important and so foundational to be honest with ourselves, because when we're not, it's like we're in some territory, we're in some terrain, but we're pretending it's a different terrain. So we're in the Grand Canyon, but we're like, I'm in, I don't know, the mountains of Idaho, and if we're kind of pretending to ourselves in some way, like if our life, if that's what's happening in our life, or that's what's happening in our business, or that's what's happening in our intimate relationship, is that we're on like a Grand Canyon adventure, but we're trying to pretend that it's like the lush green spring mountains of Idaho. Or I shouldn't say that because I've actually never been to Idaho, so I'm just like pulling shit out of my ass. That how we relate to that, the choices we make, the tools we think we need, the help that we're going to ask for, the tool in our tool belt we reach for, the when we need to rest, how much water we need to drink, what kind of clothes we need to wear. It's all going to be ill-informed. And part of the reason that I think that people don't put enough attention on building the capacity to be honest with themselves is that we tend to think we already are. Most people are like, I know where I am. I'm honest with myself all the time. Or like, I see things clearly, or I'm living my life. Don't you think I know what kind of terrain I'm in? Or But the truth is that when people really stop, and I just find this over and over and over again, and I've certainly found it in my own life as well, is that when we really stop to look around, what happens is so often, especially if something is going on that isn't quite the way we want it yet, that we're very present to that. We're having a feeling that we don't like, or we wouldn't prefer to be included in our feeling or our sensations right now. There's some, habit dynamic that's going on in our relationship that we think we should be over, or we're afraid means something about our relationship, or, XYZ, or we have an intuition about somewhere that we want our life to be headed, or we have an inkling around a desire we have, and we're terrified that if we really looked at it directly, we'd have to do something about it, and maybe our whole life would fall apart. Like maybe that would change everything. We'd have to move and quit our job, and and like our whole life would fall apart. And so we have these sort of like inklings, and then there's this fear of looking at it directly. So there's like either a subtle or a very, very dramatic pushing away of real honest looking at, true honesty of all the pieces, like what they really are. And the reason we think we're in contact with it honestly is because it's like always there, and we do know that. Pretty much everyone I've ever talked to about this is like, oh yeah, I had that sense, or I've been feeling it, or it's right there. I've been avoiding that feeling forever. And so we think like, I'm in full contact with it because it's all there all the time and I'm always aware of it. But actually we're turning away from it, or we're pushing it away, or we're denying in some way, rather than like really putting it right in front of us, like right on our desk or on our dining room table, or looking at it just head on with full honesty, and also without judgment. Honesty itself doesn't include judgment, and honesty itself doesn't include shame, and honesty itself isn't trying to change anything. And honesty itself isn't trying to get anything. It's literally describing what is already so. But being in contact with and not really look, that's why we think we're in contact, but really it's not seeing fully or directly, or touching fully, or being willing to look at with eyes wide open. Like a lot of times also it's like I can see the terrain. I know where I am. I'm completely aware of my relationship with money, but it's like that, rather than like, gosh, like what really just is it? And so again, I just alluded to one piece of this, but I think so often either we haven't built the capacity, or we're so afraid that we can't look at whatever it is without blame, shame, judgment, all those things that I just trying to change it, all those things that we're waiting until we think we have the capacity to do that in order to look at something directly. And there are some things that I would, you may know, or I would suggest like, yeah, please, like, have a supportive friend to look at it with you. Have a guide who can walk that terrain with you, or support, or something that can help hold you in that. There are certain things that it might be true about. For the most part, what I have really discovered is that humans are capable of seeing what is honestly already so. So I do a little like zig and then a little zag here, but one of the reasons I realized when I realized like, oh, this is the fifth pillar of sacred sovereignty, is this honesty, and specifically honesty with self. And it was in a little dialogue I had with one of my colleagues and mentors, where she was like, well, that's my first pillar of like anything. That's ground zero. And I was like, oh, actually it is for me too. And it was so baseline for me. It was so the water I was swimming in. As I said, this comes into every single program I teach, every piece of self-awareness, every experience that I lead people through. is like, just be honest about what's happening, just with yourself, with no shame, no blame, no judgment, no figuring out why, no trying to change it, or, all these things, shift, have a growth experience, like transform it. Like, let's just actually be honest about it was so baseline for me that it didn't even occur to me as a pillar. I was like, and so that's kind of the beauty of these things, right? I was like, oh, but that is like, truly, that's foundational. It is actually, the other pillars depend on it. So these other pillars, when I talk about the recognition that my life is not dictated by external circumstances, first of all, I have to actually be honest about what the external circumstances are. So one of the things that I've seen, and when people talk about sovereignty, is this idea that that's where sovereignty stops for most people. My life is not dictated by external circumstances. And that can lead to what I would call spiritual bypassing, in the form of like, I create my own reality completely. Now, do I have a lot of impact on my reality? 100%. Now, do like things like systemic racism and misogyny exist? Absolutely. Do those impact my life? Yes. Do I get to just choose completely out of them because I say so? Like, do I get to just choose like gravity doesn't exist because I create my own reality? No, of course not. But my life is not dictated by external circumstances. Actually requires, not only do I tell the truth to myself about the ways in which I have far more power than I may have previously acknowledged to myself, but also it means telling the truth about the external circumstances that are challenging. I remember another colleague of mine, Kimberly Johnson, talking about the ways in which being a solo parent actually is more challenging, and then the ways in which those of us who are or have been solo parents might not say that because, like, oh, that might be victim mentality. Actually, there's also just value to the lay of the land. Like, yeah, there is a distinct challenge, for instance, in if I have like a physical or medical emergency and I don't have another adult in the house to stay with my child while I go handle my physical medical emergency. That's like an actual challenge. Now, is my life dictated by external circumstances? No. But part of actually being able to choose outside of, like, my life will not be dictated by external circumstances, requires that I be honest about the external circumstances of my particular life. And then this, the second pillar, my life is not dictated by internal circumstances. So similarly, that requires that I actually tell the truth about my internal circumstances. It requires I tell the truth about my fears and my hopes and my desires, and that I'm scared and that I'm happy and that I have this sensation and that I want to do this and that I don't want to do that. Like, all the internal circumstances, that I don't try to pretend that I'm, less afraid than I am, either externally, right, to like present that externally, but even to myself, like, I'm not afraid, or, I believe in myself more than I actually do. Like, the willingness to say, like, wow, I'm really scared about this. Wow, I'm really doubting myself. Like, this is the internal lay of the land right now. And still, my life is not dictated by my internal circumstances. But in order to choose that, in order to recognize the truth and the sovereignty of that, I have to be willing to tell the truth of my internal circumstances. So the third pillar, the capacity to limit choices in service of more freedom. So I have to be willing to tell the truth about, what even are my current choices? Where am I making choices? I think the example I gave at one point was around this was, I would actually have more freedom in my life if I just took like half the clothes out of my closet. But so many of it, and this is like a very surface example. So many of us actually are telling ourselves, like, I have nothing to wear. And we know that's not true, but it's kind of what we're telling ourselves. We're saying like that I don't have any choice around this, and I don't have enough choices, rather than actually maybe if I limited my choices, I would have more freedom. I think if I had more choices, I would have more freedom, but often it's if I had less choices. If I just was like, actually, this giving myself more choices right now is not serving me, is not offering me more freedom. But we have to tell the choices, we have to tell the truth to ourselves about, again, our external circumstances, our internal circumstances, the reality of our life, and even tell the truth to ourselves about the choices we're making. So often we say, like, I don't have a choice about that, or these kinds of things, rather than saying, like, I actually have a choice here, and I have the capacity to limit my choices. And even telling the truth, right? Even telling the truth about that would actually create more freedom in my life. So in this way, this fifth pillar of honesty, and specifically honesty with self, is foundational to the other four pillars of sacred sovereignty. It's so foundational. Just our capacity to see things head on and then tell the truth about what is already so. I was just writing a post today that was kind of bouncing off another colleague of mine, Harry Pickens, wrote about an experience he had of somebody. He was telling one specific story that kind of related to a way in which people have made assumptions about him his whole life, because he's a 6'9" Black man. And these assumptions, and how the importance of bringing curiosity. And in response to that post, I was saying that what I think is so important is actually that we tell the truth about the assumptions we make about other people before we even have any opportunity to shift those assumptions. So often what I see people say is like, I don't make judgments. Even like assumption makes an ass out of you and me has people not want to make assumptions, which isn't possible. It's not possible. What is totally possible, and what I think people actually want, is to not make their assumptions right, to not believe their assumptions and make them right about other people, so that we limit our curiosity about other people. But what is true is that we actually have to be honest with ourselves about the assumptions we're making about other people before we can even have the capacity to make them not right, not like solidify them about other people. We have to be willing to go like, oh, I saw that person and I thought they must play basketball. I saw that person. And I lead practices around this. I used to get people together in person, put them across from each other, and have them fill in a sentence down like what I make up that you're good about, what I imagine is similar about us, what I imagine is different about us. And the things that come out of people want to say, like, first of all, they hate doing, they're like, ah, because we're so trained, like, don't make assumptions about other people, don't judge them, when in fact we're making assumptions and we're judging them all the time. Now we maybe shouldn't tell other people the assumptions we make about them or the judgments we're having all the time. But if we're not even willing to be honest with ourselves about those, then we can't ever really address them. I think it's James Baldwin who basically said nothing can truly be addressed until it's truly looked at. And so this is where judgment and assumption ends up living in the shadow. And what lives in the shadow runs our lives. It's as though there was a car, and instead of just backseat driving being like a bad idea, where someone's telling you what to do and you're like, shut the fuck up, I actually have the steering wheel and the pedals here, is like the person in the backseat actually had the steering wheel and the pedals and was like fucking with where the car is going. It's like the toddler. You know how there are those fake steering wheels that you can give toddlers so that they feel like they're driving? I don't know if that's actually a good idea. Anyway, it's like one of the things that people do for their kids when their kids are in the back seat, and they put these fake driving, steering wheels, and it makes their kid feel like they're actually driving when you're the one driving. And so that's true about us. It's like we're actually we're like the toddler, though. Like, we think we're totally in control of our lives, and really anything that we're unwilling to tell the truth about to ourselves is actually like navigating the car from the back seat. As long as we are unwilling to truly acknowledge and look full on, it has more power over us. So all those judgments and assumptions and everything that we're going like, I'm looking at it, but we're not willing to take our hands off of our faith. That was me about money for my whole life until like 5 years ago. So I say this without any blame, shame, or judgment. Like, I know what this feels like, but it was really, and that's literally what I said to my financial consultant when I hired him. I was like, I want to take the way that I'm looking at money like this, and I want to look at it like this. And that's what I truly, really, truly believe we need to do with every area of our life in order to truly live our lives from sacred sovereignty, to have that kind of real, I don't even want to say control over our lives because that's an illusion, but this to reside and take the seat of sovereignty inside our own lives requires that we tell the truth, and to let go of the idea of like, oh my God, I have to do all that right now. Like, even the understanding, like, there will always be some new hidden in the shadows, unacknowledged thing. And but as soon as we become aware of it, or as soon as we have the opportunity, as soon as there's some little inkling out of the corner of our eye, and we can go like, oh, so often it's like some little lizard tail out of the corner of our eye, and we're like, oh my God, don't look at that. Or it's like a snake, right? Like, I don't want to see that there's a snake over there. There's a spider in the corner, I don't want to look at it. Rather than that, going like, oh, but I will, like, all of the sovereignty and I hate this word, but like power, like how much more empowered I will be around whatever this is and in my life when I just go like, oh, actually that's like this teeny tiny little spider, or oh my God, it's like a huge spider, but it's actually dead. I'm not even scared of it. I can pick it up with a tissue, take it outside. Or, like, it's alive and it's huge, and now I know what to do about it because I'm gonna call someone else to come and like get this spider out of my house. Whatever that thing is, if we can bring it into full consciousness and just look like, this is how much money I actually have in my bank account. Oh, this is the assumption I'm actually making about that person. I think I lost the tail of that story when I was saying, so I would put people in front of each other, and then I could kind of overhear. Like, I was never like listening to one group, but I could overhear, and I would hear people say things like, I'm making up that you're good at math. And I was thinking, like, where do we even come up with this stuff? Like, how would I ever, from the way that somebody looks, like, decide they're good at math or not good at math? Like, what do I think you're interested in? How do I think we're similar? I think we're similar like this. I got really upset actually recently with someone who's in my wider community who was saying nice things about me, but they were assumptions, and was basically like, we are the same like this about these kinds of things, and kind of asserting that we had similar spiritual views. And I was like, you have no idea what my spiritual views are. Like, don't make that assumption. And I think, like, the way we do that when we actually forget to pay attention and go like, I have just made this up about this person. And in a way to celebrate getting to see that, rather than like, oh no, I made an assumption, I shouldn't make an assumption, like, like put it back in the box in the shadows and pretend like I never make snap judgments and I never have assumptions and I just see everybody as a blank slate. And I'm, because none of us do that. None of us do that. And so even just to be honest about that, clearly I don't do that, and each of us, if we can just be honest about that, opens up some space and some breathing room to start to see, well, what are the assumptions I make? Like, as I walk down the street, even start to, not as a way of reifying stereotypes and your assumptions, but to bring to the light. When something comes to the light and then it has breathing room, it's like it can actually poof, it can just dissipate. Like, what do I assume about that person? What am I making up? Where do I think they're headed? What do I think they are doing? What do I think they're good at? What kind of a job do I think they have? What kind of an education do I think they have? And allow yourself not to make up stories about them, but to acknowledge the stories you are already making up about them. Like, again, describe what is already so. Describe what's already so about your external circumstances, your internal circumstances, the judgments and assumptions that you make, your hopes and your fears and your desires. And that in and of itself, that is the absolute foundation for all sacred sovereignty, for the other 4 pillars of sacred sovereignty, and for all sacred sovereignty in every area of your life. So I'm going to leave it there for now. And just in gratitude for those of you who are with me on this journey live, for any of you who are watching this as a replay, I know there's not really time for question and answer, shares, inquiry, the dialogue around this, but whether you're watching on in any platform that you're watching this on, if you were live or if you're watching the replay and you do have comments, questions, shares, agreements, disagreements, I always love those. I will come back and reply after the fact. And I will also add in the resources that I mentioned, both the other 4 pillars of sacred sovereignty that I first came up with, and then the blog that I wrote about it back when I first wrote about it. Loving you and just wishing you, I wish for you more and more honesty with self, because honestly, it's better. It feels good when we can go like, oh yeah, look at that. That's just true about what's already so. Like, now I can choose to want it that way, do not want it that way. So I wish that for you with so much love. Ciao.